Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Oraculos Horary Astrology Hotline. I'm your host, Mychal Bryan, and joining me today are my wonderful friends and fellow astrologers from all around, you're all across America. So we have Ms. TRACEY PACELLI. Hey there, TRACEY, how are you?
Hey there, Mychal. Doing okay.
Good. TRACEY is hailing from sunny Florida.
Yes.
We have JANAY Anthony all the way in Chicago. JANAY, how are you?
I have seen better days, but I am happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to be here with you, JANAY. So thank you so much for spending time on a Sunday to be here with all of us. We have Ms. RASHA HASAN. RASHA is in, I'm not sure how sunny it is in San Francisco, but RASHA is hailing from San Francisco. Hey, RASHA.
Hey, I'm actually in San Jose now.
Oh,
It is south. It is south of San Francisco. And it's sunny today.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. Well, we're definitely happy to have you here as well, RASHA. And Mr. Cameron Allen. Cameron, I assume that you are in Tennessee, but I know that that may be very, very incorrect. Where are you and how are you?
Yeah, I'm back in Memphis, Tennessee for now, for at least the eclipse season going on. I'm feeling pretty good, grounding in pretty deep. Yeah.
Good stuff. There's no place like home for the eclipses. Anyway, everyone, I'm super delighted to be able to dive in once again for yet another podcast episode here on the Oraculos podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, whether you're tuning in on YouTube or Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or wherever, we're super happy to have you here. Please make sure that you like the show as well as subscribe to the channel by hitting on the subscription button and also hit the notification bell so that you receive notifications of when we bring you this and other episodes throughout each and every week. Now, today, we're diving into yet another horary question. And this one was a bit interesting. One, because of the shape of the question, but two, because of what really was the underlying reason of the question, which goes back to a conversation we had on the last episode of the show, which was essentially, what question does the universe ask when you bring a question to the moment of divination? Is it the question that comes out of your mouth, or is it the question that comes out of your heart? And I think that this was definitely an area where we need to consider that question as a larger philosophical backdrop regarding the answer that we actually came up with for this client. So before I go on, I'm going to allow TRACEY PACELLI to let us know what the question was, and then starting with TRACEY and going around, just tell me what were some of the approaches you thought of taking and ultimately took when you saw this question.
Okay, I will give it a stab. The question is, how can I regain sureness that everything is working out all right? And oh boy, you figure, just reading into the question, that, well, in order to ask such a question, things must not be going so well. And that they're definitely looking for some ray of sunshine, a ray of hope, that things will in the end be okay for them. And these are trying times for everyone right now with coronavirus. So I have a lot of compassion for the client. But just in looking overall, I mean, the first house is definitely the overall person. It's their psyche, it's their personality, it's their environment and sort of their operating equipment that they receive in order to tackle the environment that they're in. And then also just taking your very good advice that we always look at just to see the hour at play, to also intrinsically find out what this question and concern is about. And so that did involve the sun. So definitely brought that into it very strongly.
Awesome, TRACEY. Now, JANAY, I know that you took a crack at the question, and then RASHA and Cameron, but what were some of your thoughts in seeing a question like that?
Yeah, my first thought is Oh my God, I don't like this question at all, just because it is so overarching and vague. And especially with a technique like horary, it's kind of suited for specificity. And so, like, my approach coming from a more traditional background, I'm like, okay, typically the first house is what, encapsulates the person, their psyche, their body, just everything about the person. So I'm like, okay, so everything, if I have to choose a house to signify everything, it would be the first house. So I really focused in on like the ruler of the first house and its condition, because in my mind, that is what will most closely answer the question of everything, as opposed to something that's more specific.
Definitely. RASHA?
Yeah, when I read the question, I felt like, oh, we have room to explore everything. So it's like, oh, that's cool. I don't need to be just very specific. And now that I studied with you and I know how important is the hour of the chart, so went directly to that one, and so it was the sun. So I looked at the sun and what the sun is doing aspect to the rest, and mainly to the ruler of the first. But I actually liked it. It gave me some room to explore other areas, not just only one. And from my background, one aspect in your life, affect every other aspect in your life. So it's kind of, we can put this, weave the rest of the aspect in our life in one thing, So yeah, it was cool.
Well, I find it really interesting, this contrast between the position that JANAY had and the position that you have, RASHA, because from a more traditional perspective, it's like, oy vey, why can't this question be more specific? Whereas for you, it was a fertile ground of exploration. And I think that both of those viewpoints are valid. And I like that for you, JANAY, it was a challenge to really pull out more stuff and to really interpret the hell out of that first house. But I love how for you, RASHA, it served as a field of more exploration to go and discover more things. And it's a good thing, and we should stay open and see what comes up, regardless of whether or not it's a specific question or not. But I must admit that the lack of specificity, it does sometimes throw me, and that's just because of my own background. Now, Cameron, I know that you had mentioned earlier before we started recording that that you were a little bit, on the fence-ish philosophically about how horary and the very specific lens that horary looks at life through, how that interacts with the larger spiritual worldview, I'm guessing, but also how it interacts with your larger approach to astrology. Tell us about that.
Yeah, actually, it's curious because this time around, it actually didn't have anything to do with my philosophical spiritual background, which is usually actually the thing that gets me uncertain in some ways, However, this time it was just the question in of itself, because there are so many symbols in the chart and they can say so many different things. I'm like, well, where do I really find all of this at? It's like she said, so the word everything, right? Like everything in my favor. I'm like, well, is it every house? So for me, it's really interesting because I literally took the position that JANAY took, and I took the position that RASHA took as well. But I started with the position that JANAY took, so I got really, really locked in. And then from there, I expanded to see if I could find other things and details, which was helpful. And I feel like that was super helpful. But then I feel like I like to know. I'm a person that likes to know. So if I don't feel like I know, then I'm just like, what was it like? Was I on point all the way, fully and completely? And I feel confident about it. And also, I always like the confirmation when I'm starting something new because I like to know.
Well, I'm really happy that this week we didn't offend your larger philosophical worldview, because I know that sometimes we come at a very specific point where we have to have a conversation, but it's a good thing. And yes, it's good to want to know. But what I do when I provide you all these charts is that I give you just as much information as I had. And me personally, because of my upbringing practicing divination, it's really minimal. The information is really just the question. And then the process of divination itself unfolds everything else. Now, from my perspective, when it comes down to what else should I bring in if I don't really know where to go, the ascendant is a really special place to start. And I love the fact that you, Cameron, said that you locked into the ascendant and you really went granular and then you allowed yourself to expand. And I think that that's just good astrology. You find a symbol, you look at it under a microscope, and then you look from that place with a telescope. So you have both this very granular vision as well as this very wide vision, but the wide vision should be rooted on that grain. And yeah, maybe you do feel as if all you've been given is a grain of information. But what we find when we work in that way is that that grain expands into something bigger, and it's kind of endless. But yes, do keep doing that. Do keep focusing very granularly on the specificities of the things that you do have access to, and use those things as your launch pad to do further investigation and exploration throughout the chart. Because that just makes you a better astrologer, because now you aren't dependent on a larger background story. You're really using the symbols within that chart to give you as much information as possible. I do blind chart readings. I love them. I'll do them until the day that I die. And a part of why I do it is because there's no greater ground to sharpen yourself as an astrologer than to give a blind chart reading. I feel that way within natal astrology, and to a large degree, I feel that way in horary astrology as well, that you get the question and sometimes that's all you'll ever be given. And you use that to expand and expand and expand and expand from the specific thing that you're focusing on, which in our case is very often the ascendant and the state of the ascendant ruler. Now, the other thing that I want to say for people who are of a more counseling perspective, if you get a question like this, I think that this sort of question opens up the territory for more of an astrological counseling situation, because the question doesn't really give you that much. So yes, you still can make your statements based on the chart, but you can make your statements and then build a dialogue around that, as opposed to it just being you talking to the person with whatever your specific interpretation is. So I think that a question like this opens up a greater ground for astrological counseling, and it serves as a launch pad for a deeper conversation, if that is your particular persuasion. That isn't always my persuasion. I very much believe in just interpreting the chart because I feel as if that's something that I do well. But at the same time, if you need that feedback from the client, I think this question, had you had this client, this question would have really served as a wonderful place for you to counsel and communicate and have a conversation and build a dialogue, because those things are important as well.
I just had one question also that just brings up a point that I saw that the rising sun was 3 degrees. And I know a lot of times that people will say that that's like an unripe question that maybe needs more investigation. And I was just wondering your point of view on it being in that early degree.
Alfie Lavoie is someone who I really love deeply, and he is someone who I look up to as a grandfather figure of sorts. And I think that both he and his wife, Carol, have taken me under their wings as an astrological grandson sort of thing. And I love it. I absolutely love it. And one of the things that I learned from Alfie in an interview with him, and this isn't to say that I practice modern astrology, or I practice astrology in the same way that Alfie does. But I do think that Alfie has these solid gems of wisdom because he's been basically practicing horary astrology for 60 years. So one of the things that I got from Alfie was that in the past, they didn't like early degree rising charts or late degree rising charts because there was no stopwatch. They had no electronic clock like we have it today. It was a very speculative thing to tell exactly what time it was. Can you imagine? You're walking around with your pocket sundial on a cloudy day and you look up and you're like, hey, where's the shadow? And there is no shadow because there is no sun. How do you tell the time on a day like that? Or you're going to the obelisk, basically, to see what direction the shadow is pointing, and it's raining outside. And, I'll be damned if I try to tell the time at night using my obelisk when the whole sky is pitch black. So there's all of these considerations that we have to take into our mind when we think about the ancients and the type of technology they had and their sorts of technological limitations. Today, when we cast a chart, we can cast a chart to within 2 seconds of arc. 2 seconds of arc, not 2 degrees of arc. We can cast a chart within 2 seconds of arc using the technology that we have, whether you use Solarify or whether you use a Juno or Nova or Alfie software, the Air software. We can calculate charts specific to the second, you see? So I don't think that we have to have this fear of interpreting a chart that's too late or too early. I think it may give us information, but I don't think that that information that the chart gives us is something that prevents that chart from being readable, which is another thing that people say, oh, if the chart is too early, it's unreadable. If it's too late, it's unreadable. I mean, truthfully, when I give natal readings, and I'm doing a blind reading demonstration, and someone submits a chart with 29 degrees rising, I ask for another chart. And that's just me. And the reason why I ask for another chart is, and I'm thinking about the masterclass I taught yesterday, someone submitted a chart at 29 degrees rising, 29, I think it was Virgo rising. And the reason why I asked for another chart is because if that birth time was off by 2 minutes, that person would have had 0 degrees Libra rising. And how many of us really and truly trust our birth time? I mean, maybe you do. Maybe you do. I have one of those birth times that seems oddly rounded. And it's like, why am I born exactly on the half hour? Why couldn't I have been born in like the half hour and 7 minutes? It's like that sort of thing. So once again, I think this falls down to your discretion as an astrologer. I know some people who make a big fuss about that. I'm one of those people, but definitely not with the horary chart, because the horary moment is a moment where you know exactly what time it is. And so if you do choose a chart that has 0 degrees Cancer, 1 minute rising, that's the chart. And that's the chart I'd go with because that already has information.
Mychal, you did when we had the class with you, you did say when the chart is early or late, it would be questionable. It's like, okay, the question is not ripe enough. The person is not knowing enough. So what you mean now, what you're saying, that we can read it, but we can tell the person who's asking things are not still forming. You're still trying to understand what's happening. I mean, you can still read it. Am I right? That's what you're saying?
You can most assuredly read any chart. This goes back to the topic of strictures against judgment and how that term strictures against judgment was taken from the original term considerations before judgment. And this term strictures against judgment is something that I think comes to us from Ivy Jacobson. And it's an interesting thing that happens in your mind when someone tells you that this is a stricture against judgment versus this being a consideration before judgment. Stricture against makes it feels like you cannot pass. If this thing happens, do not read this chart. Whereas saying something like consideration before judgment, it softens that. And it says, well, hey, if this thing is happening, then, pause and just consider why this thing might be happening. If you have the via combustor rising, pause and consider why is the via combustor rising and how does that augment what you're going to tell your client. If you have 0 degrees rising or 29 degrees rising, pause and consider before you judge. Consider before you say what you're going to say, how this thing may be augmenting or adapting or modifying the energy of this chart, but it doesn't make that chart unreadable. And I actually can think of no practicing horary astrologer today who would use any of these classical considerations before judgment to cause them to not read the chart. I can't think of one person. If you're out there, probably don't let me know. Let me know if you're out there. Okay, anyway, but the point is, RASHA, you can read every chart. And when we were having class, I'd never say use it to not read the chart. What I probably said was exactly what I said earlier. When I see that in a natal chart, it gives me a little bit of anxiety because, am I going to spend an entire hour talking to you about you having a chart with Venus in Virgo exactly conjunct Pluto in the 12th house as being your chart ruler? Whereas if you were born 2 minutes later, you actually have a beautiful Venus in Libra rising sort of chart situation. Not Venus in Virgo, I mean Mercury in Virgo. The whole point is that with a natal chart, I'm already a little bit wary because I've given readings sometimes when I've gotten 30 minutes into the reading and the person said, I think I may have been born an hour earlier. And so that already gives me the heebie-jeebies, much less building an entire reading for a chart around the chart that has 0 degrees rising, which means that ascendant would be ruled by a completely different planet. But in horary, we don't have that problem because in horary, you have your iPhone, you can take note of the time automatically, and that isn't a problem for us. So now, without further ado, we are going to dive into our chart for the day, in which the question is, how can I know that everything is working out in my favor? Do enjoy. All right, so everyone, here is our chart for the day. And for those of you listening in a listen-only format, the information of this chart is that it was cast on the 18th of October, 2020 at 2:18:59 p.m. That's 2 o'clock, 18 minutes, 59 seconds p.m. Eastern Daylight Time in Nassau, Bahamas. I'm using Regiomontana's houses and the tropical zodiac and the true node for this geocentric chart. So TRACEY, PACELLI, take it away.
Thank you, Mychal. So what we have here is 3 degrees Aquarius rising. So we know that's an early degree, and so we can read it according to Horary rules. But we do know that there's a lot to investigate because it is an early degree in the sign. And it's got a very weighty feeling to it because Saturn would be the ruler in this chart. And also the fact that this person is in the terms of Saturn as well. So that really adds a lot of weightiness to their personality and to the gravity of the situation that they feel that they're in. And they have a lot of essential dignity. Intrinsically, they've got a lot of the goods to keep themselves going. They're in a comfortable, joyful place because Saturn is in its joy in the 12th house, but it's sort of a prison of their own making. And Saturn is in the sign of Capricorn, where it does have essential dignity. And that's where I would start with that.
Great stuff. So just to take over from there, TRACEY, I think that it's interesting that you mentioned that the person, i.e. the person as Saturn, is in the terms of Saturn, because up until 25 degrees Capricorn would be ruled by Mars from 19 degrees Capricorn to 25 degrees Capricorn. So this person being represented by Saturn in 25 degrees Capricorn, 39 minutes, they have only just entered into the terms of Saturn. So yes, you are correct. It does add another layer of heaviness or another layer of weight. But what I also find interesting is that the ascendant itself is in the terms of Saturn, because in Aquarius, Saturn is ruling the first term of Aquarius from 0 degrees Aquarius up until 6 degrees of Aquarius, or rather 5 degrees, 59 minutes of Aquarius. So not only do we have the significator of the querent in the term of Saturn, but we also have the actual ascendant degree falling within the term of Saturn in the domicile of Saturn. So this is a very Saturnian chart. And this is the part of Aquarius that we oftentimes ignore, because we would love in the 21st century in modern astrology to feel as if the Aquarius and Uranus are having more of a kinship or having more of a relationship. But there's something very stubborn and there's something very Saturnian within the heart of the Aquarian native. And that Saturn nature doesn't manifest itself in the same way as Saturn manifests itself in Capricorn, but the Saturn nature, insofar as Aquarius is concerned, is a matter of the Aquarian being Saturnian about the future. I want this to manifest in the future. And therefore, it may seem as if the Aquarian is counterculture because of how future-oriented they are, but they're Saturnian about future things. I want the future to look this way. Therefore, I'll rebel against the culture as it looks right now because I feel as if there's a better, a higher way of doing things. Words which are fundamentally caught up within our archetype and our notion of Saturn. Anyway, we could go on for days about the whole Saturnian relationship to Aquarius, but the whole point is that when I see a chart like this, it already has me thinking that this person has very Saturnian thoughts, very fixed and dense thoughts about the shape that things should be in her life right now. And with Saturn in Capricorn, there's a sense that, and I'm going to work to make those things happen, period. So there really isn't a sense of telling this person no. No, the things that you want will not happen. You know, the things that you've gotten so fixed about, it doesn't matter how hard you work, some things are just not supposed to be. Because this person has the divine authority of Saturn in every way imaginable that says that if I work hard at it, it's going to come to pass. And those people are a little bit difficult to really connect with in a deep sort of way, because it's difficult to convince someone that, hey, sometimes in life, it doesn't matter how hard you work at something. If it's not meant for you, it's just not meant for you. And this is a person who is very much caught up within the notion that hard work pays off. Sorry, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off of what you were saying about like this Saturn stubbornness and how the querent seems like they don't take no for an answer. Like it's even evident in the phrasing of their question, like, how can I regain sureness? Like just that phrasing of regain sureness. It's like, okay, well, I know things will eventually be okay, but how do I get there first? When really the answer is like, will it actually be okay? Because there's so much emphasis on the 12th house. TRACEY mentioned prior, like the 12th house is the joy of Saturn. And so it's kind of like there's all of this uncertainty going on, but at the same time, the querent isn't really willing to admit to it or submit to it because, you know, the 12th house is a house of one's own undoing, just in and of itself, but then also the fact that the ascendant and the 12th house are both ruled by Saturn. So it really is literally ruler of the ascendant, the querent, is her own self-undoing ruler of the 12th house. So it's just like this stubbornness leading to this situation where so many things are falling apart, and because the querent isn't willing to accept that these things are falling apart and kind of just wants to keep moving forward past it, they don't really, well, it seems like they're not really taking stock of the seriousness of the chaos around them, and they're just trying to push through it without actually processing everything that's going on.
Good stuff. Now, what I say to people about the 12th house is that insofar as Saturn is concerned, or truly any planet that's in its terrestrial house of joy, so Mercury in the 1st house, the Moon in the 3rd house, or Venus in the 5th house, or Mars in the 6th house, or the Sun in the 9th house, or Jupiter in the 11th house, or Saturn in the 12th house. Any planet that is in the house of its joy, it doesn't necessarily mean that the planet receives strength there. What it means is that the planet receives comfort there. So Saturn isn't made stronger by being in the 12th house. Saturn is made more comfortable by being in the 12th house. Because where else will Saturn enjoy being other than the 12th house? It's a wonderful house for Saturn. It's like a match made in heaven. So that being said, this person is in a cadent house, and we know that cadent houses denote 25% strength versus having 100% strength in an angular house. So this person is in a cadent house. So they're weakened by their environment, they're weakened by the circumstances that they find themselves in. But secondly, they're in the cadent house. It also happens to be the house of their joy, which is the house that they also rule. So this person is comfortable within the shape of situations as they are right now, regardless of how, quote unquote, without power it makes them feel within the larger scope of the situation. They're comfortable within this patterning of conditioning that they've allowed themselves to enter, because this is just how I operate and this is just what I do. I'm Saturn. And the thing with Saturn is you can't ever really point out to a Saturnian person the things that they're doing to themselves that are wrong or that are harmful, because so much of their lives feel like responsibility or feels like an excessive amount of work, that the fact that this other part of their life feels uncomfortable, it doesn't register to them that, but it feels uncomfortable because it's wrong. When you have gotten so accustomed to the shape of a life of work, to the shape of a life of service, to the shape of a life of constantly doing for other people and constantly putting yourself in the position to be the bearer of the burdens of the world, when someone finally points out to you, hey, but this burden here, this doesn't belong to you. Hey, this burden, like this one right here, this is actually pain. That's not just pressure, that's actually pain. It becomes very difficult for the Saturnian person to pull those two things apart, because it just seems so much a part of my own nature in any event, that why are you pointing this thing out when my entire life looks like this? So that's the relationship of Saturn to the 12th house, which is a rather interesting thing indeed. RASHA, HASAN.
Yeah, so next we would go to the moon, and moon is in the angular house, which is, you know, we know that it's a function of from 100 degree of being active, but the moon is in Scorpio, which is it's an on-fall, and what we call it is like a descent into a sorrow and despair. So it's really, the moon is not happy in Scorpio, and that's the other would add this fixation, because it's a fixed sign, and add more of this fixation, not being flexible, not seeing all angles of their own life, kind of more adding to this depression of, I think, what this chart is bringing. And if we look at the moon is the ruler of the six, so that would make me think there's some health issues that's adding to there's a connection between health and work or mission in life. So it's either their work is adding some health issues in their life, or there's some kind of connection there. And that's what I think the parent needs to ask themselves, what's happening with my health and how this affecting my work, or vice versa.
Great stuff. Now, I really love the fact that you pulled in the fact that the moon is ruling the sixth house. And truthfully, for me, if this were a natal consideration, I would definitely use that moon more along the lines of it being a sickness or a malady or something that is harmful to this person's body, for example. However, within the context of traditional astrology, the first house is really the house of health, and the sixth house would be the house of sickness or the house of things that pull away from my health. Now, if we were to look at this chart and say, okay, hey, is this person a healthy person? We have Saturn in its domicile as the ruler of the first house. So I don't necessarily feel as if health as a tangible, my body is in peril sort of thing is the real consideration with this moon. And also we see that moon is in a sextile with the Saturn and a sextile with the Pluto. The moon is sextiling the entire Capricorn gaggle, basically. What I do think that moon symbolizes is a furthering of stress. Now, when it comes to talking about the sixth house, we talk about sickness, but we also talk about slavery. And in the 21st century, we know that slavery, hopefully, only looks like stress within people's lives. Like, these are the things that I do that stress me out. So here we have the ruler of stress having the highest elevation in this chart. The highest place in the chart is literally on the midheaven. And we also have the ruler of stress sextiling the Pluto and sextiling the Saturn. And actually, this is a translation of light from the moon and Pluto to the moon and Saturn, because the Pluto is at 22 degrees, the moon is at 23 degrees, the Saturn is at 25. So the moon is taking that energy of Pluto and taking it to Saturn. So poor Saturn thought that she had separated from Pluto, but here comes the moon to bring that Pluto right back to her. And what type of moon is it? It's the moon in Scorpio. This is a rough chart. It's a pretty rough chart in all senses of the word rough. Now, for me, what that says is that the sort of situations that you find yourself being ushered into, or the sort of situations that you find yourself being pushed into, are situations that feel, one, overwhelming, but two, they feel like you can't do anything about them. The situation, the more it goes forward, the more it feels like it's actively pulling power away from you, and it's forcing you into a situation that doesn't feel good, and it's forcing you into a situation that feels superiorly stressful, not just because the moon is ruling stress within this chart, but also because the moon translating the light from Pluto to the Saturn, it brings an immense amount of stress and pressure into your life that doesn't feel good, and that feels manipulative, and that possibly also feels cruel. So these are things that you have to consider as you move through this question. Querent, you have to consider, how am I, querent, keeping myself fixed? And I love the fact that you use the word fixed, RASHA. How am I keeping myself fixed in the fabric of something that hasn't been working, that still isn't working, and even as the future of the situation unfolds, it still won't work? There's no shape of this working at this moment. Why and how do I allow myself to stay fixed here? What thoughts am I allowing myself to continuously be fixed in that aren't really letting me be great in the grander scheme of who I want to be and where I want to be as the situation continues? So that is a consideration.
Yeah, so something that was interesting that I saw was the fact that there was 4 planets in fall in the chart. That's just, that being highlighted is just like a lot of things are, yeah, they're descending and it's not working out the greatest. And I also felt like a highlighted sense of the fixity of the thought patterning, even just with Mercury retrograde in Scorpio, and then that be opposing Uranus and Taurus. That was like one of the things at the end. I was like, oh wow, they're so fixed, and then it's just adding in more fixedness, and then the thought patterning, like reviewing thoughts again and stuff like that. So those are the things that I saw that were really curious, but mostly just the planets in fall, to have so many in one chart, and then to have both of the malefics really strong in the chart too, in one of the malefics retrograde. It's like, that's interesting. It's like we already came to some type of conclusion, and at the end it's like, that's interesting as well, and that like gives me more information moving forward if I do get into another chart where I don't have things that are very clear, and I can look to other things to give me more information.
Definitely. I think it's a really important point you made about seeing so many planets in their fall here. And yeah, we have the 2 luminaries in fall. We have the sun in the Via Combusta. We have Venus in fall in the 8th house, which is the 12th house from her domicile, because here we have Venus ruling the 9th house. So this would be the 1st house for Venus. But here we have Venus in the 8th house, which is the 12th house of the 9th house. So Venus is in her own 12th house. I mean, there's many things problematic about the sky, like not just about this chart, but about the sky in general under which this chart was cast. And I think when we know what the astrological weather is in general, it also tells us something about the sort of questions and the outcomes of the sort of questions that we're going to be getting, because we know that there are no major trines of great use going on in the sky right now. So we also know that probably this question isn't going to work out for the very best in terms of the querent. And the sky reflects a lot of what was going on within this person's life at the moment.
Just one thought popped in my head when you were talking about the sky and Cameron talking about all the falling planets. It's like literally the sky is falling for the querent.
Definitely, the sky is falling for the querent, and also it's falling for everyone for the most part. Here we have the universal state of the sky particularizing itself within this young lady's chart and showing us some of the intrinsic difficulties that she was facing within her life. So I'm going to pass it over to RASHA again, because I know that RASHA has been eyeballing the hour of the chart for quite a while. So RASHA, tell me, what was some of the information that you got from observing the sun as being planetary hour ruler within this chart?
Yeah, so the planetary ruler is the sun, and you can't help you go directly where is Leo. And that's the 7th house. Leo rules the 7th house. And then we're thinking maybe this part of the question of the querents could be something related to the partner. And of course, that could be a partner as a business partner or a partner on life. So, and the sun is in this chart, the sun is in Libra, which is, again, it's in its own fall. So that's another indication that the partner is giving the querent a hard time, or something that is not clear, because this is also in the cadent house. So it's like really the partner is not functioning in her life. So that would be a question for for me as an astrologer to ask the querent is like, what's happening there? Did you paying attention for what's happening in your life with your partner?
I also thought it was interesting that the planetary hour ruler was also in the declination table. It's parallel. Is it the part of fortune?
Yes.
So something about the happiness in that planet being in fall as well is just bringing in more fall-y energy. So it's just like, I don't know. It also brought up a point when I was reflecting and writing too as well, because I wrote a lot about this chart. I was writing like, what would happen if I like had a client like this, and I was like doing like, what I was like thinking in my mind as like a consultation horary rather than just a regular horary. And I'm like, well, what would I say to this person, and like their happiness being connected to their partner, and maybe even like if they can't see their partner because they're traveling. Just like these things started like coming up in my head, so I just thought I'd share that too. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, Cameron. And for those of you who don't know why Cameron is referring to the part of fortune as a place of happiness, it's because the part of fortune has always been considered to be a place where we are made fortunate, or where we find luck or wealth, but also a place where we find the hunger that we have for happiness being fulfilled. And here we have the part of fortune at 1 degree Pisces. And when we delineate parts, we want to see what aspects are occurring to those parts, but also the ruler of those parts. And even before taking into consideration the fact that, yes, we do have this parallel between the part of fortune and the sun, which is saying, like Cameron rightfully said, my partner is someone in whom my happiness is fulfilled. I think that's a really good and a salient statement about that. When we look at this concept of the fulfillment of my desire and really further this, we see that the ruler of the part of fortune is Jupiter in fall, applying to Pluto in the 12th house. And not only is Jupiter the ruler of the part of fortune, but Jupiter is also the ruler of the 11th house, i.e., the Jupiter is ruling the house of my fulfillment of desires, my hopes and wishes. The South Node is there. So my hopes and wishes don't have the ability to be fulfilled right now. My Jupiter in fall in the 12th house is saying, and the things that I'm hopeful and desirous of are things that are actively working against my better interest. And what am I hopeful and desirous of, truthfully? Well, I'm hopeful and desirous of whatever is in connection with this part of fortune. And while we don't see any major aspects of the part of fortune, we definitely do see the part of fortune in our declination table being parallel to our sun, which is representing the boyfriend who was a part of this situation as well. So very good looking out, Cameron. That's a really good point you brought up.
Can I just add as well, I did not mention that the sun is exact square to Saturn, which is the ruler of the chart, which is the ruler of the querent. So that's really adding a lot of stress as a partner to her life. And of course, it's squaring, it's separating from Pluto and Jupiter, but it's an exact to Saturn.
Exactly. And I think that has a lot of information within it already, because at this point, I'm pretty sure that we're all of the persuasion that this is really and truthfully a question about her relationship, is it not? And so said, so done. So, Janae, now knowing that this is a question about relationships, and we see the exact square between the sun and Saturn, what information might we have for this querent about the situation?
Yeah, just focusing in on the dignity, the fact that the sun is in fall in Libra and Saturn is in dignity in Capricorn would lead me to believe that the querent's partner might be very reliant on the querent, because the querent, even though they're not in the best of positions, they might be a little bit more stable than the partner is. And so the fact that the partner is depending on the querent so much might be a cause of tension between them.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention that, you know, the Sun and Libra being in fall and also being peregrine, and also maybe even considered void of course, because it's just going nowhere. It's not making any future connections anytime soon. That this person's just, this is a person really lost in the Cadent house, doesn't have any power. They're just in a real bad way.
I really like what Janae said earlier about the fact that the querent is possibly really the rock within this relationship. And even as you look at the chart visually, Saturn is standing on the ascendant, whereas we have the partner, the Sun, seeming to be roving in the dark, trying to figure out his life, trying to figure out where next to place himself. And it's a tough situation to be in. And it's also a tough situation to be in because he's the one who is doing movement. You know, he's the one who isn't doing well, but he's the one who is moving around, whereas it's really the querent who is holding this place of stability and certainty within herself about how this relationship can turn out and possibly even how it should turn out. What we can see here is that this is a case of reception because the Sun is in the exaltation of Saturn. So technically, Saturn is receiving the Sun, and Guido Bonatti says that a square with reception is similar to a sextile without reception. But even then, that still shows difficulty within the relationships between them. But then when we add on top of that the fact that the Sun is in fall, and we add on top of that the fact that both of these planets are cadent, and we add on top of that the fact that the Moon is in the sort of situation that she's in, it really brings in a state of affairs where it seems as if we're moving from bad to badder, and ultimately to baddest. And there are some reasons why we're moving to baddest within this situation, not just because the fact that the ruler of my hopes and dreams is in the 12th house in fall, or that the South Node is in my 11th house of the fulfillment of those desires, or that the ruler of that 11th house is the ruler of my part of fortune, both of whom are in a precarious state of affairs. The deeper we poke within this chart, the more we find a situation that isn't really comfortable. So for the question, how can I regain sureness that everything is working out in my favor? The first thing that we want to tell this person is, hey, you have to be connected with reality enough to know for a fact that at this moment, it doesn't seem as if everything is working out in your favor. And the fact that you want to have sureness about this thing, the certainty that you're searching for may directly stand in the way of you actually hearing the truth. Because right now, the truth is no, things aren't working out in your favor. And they're not working out in your favor in a way that may truly be painful, and in a way that may truly have you in a state of pain and confusion. But the sooner you understand that, then the better you can pinpoint those areas in your life that perpetuate this sort of situation. And then you can mobilize yourself from the state that you're in and move on, which is very difficult to tell a Saturnian person to genuinely move on. But that's what she's needing to do within this situation, to move. Because that movement is possibly the only thing that will bring her the sort of freedom that she is looking for. And on the same note of freedom, yes, as RASHA pointed out earlier, the ruler of the 6th house is this Moon in Scorpio in the 10th house. However, I always say something in relationship charts when we refer to the 6th house. What do I say about it?
That the 6th house is the partner's 12th house?
Yes. Absolutely, positively, certainly, yes. The 6th house. What do you say, Tracy?
I just said yay, Janae.
Yay, Janae. The 6th house is the partner's 12th house, is it not? So this chart has the moon on blast. But in having the moon on blast, it has all the partner's dirty laundry on blast as well. And so what that's saying is that the most visible part of this chart, the planet that has the highest elevation in the sky in this chart, in zodiacal longitude, is the planet that rules all of the hidden things that my partner does that aren't good for me and they're not good for my partner. Because for me, my 6th house stuff represents a source of stress. For my partner's 12th house stuff represents a source of self-undoing. But whatever it is, whatever this 6th house represents in this chart is out in the open for all the world to see. And it's affecting everyone. It's affecting my partner. It's affecting me. And it's making me feel as if I'm being dragged even deeper into the body of a situation that isn't right for me. Because like I said, that moon has only just separated from that Pluto and is then going to apply to that Saturn. So it's making this person feel as if it's dragging her into an even deeper Plutonian state of affairs that isn't the correct set of affairs for her. So, what do you do when you realize so deeply the source of your suffering? It would seem as if the correct response would be to leave, but insofar as leaving isn't something that you personally want to do, then how will you navigate being in a relationship that feels so fundamentally debilitating to your heart, your mind, and your body?
Mychal, I have a question. I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer your question now. But when we looked at it, we felt as well that the financial issue for the querent is affected by the partner, and I wondered if that's the case. And because we saw, I think, because the 2nd house from the 7th from the partner is the 8th, and her 2nd house has Neptune. So we thought there is some reliance from the partners taking more money or depending on the querent financially, and the querent financial issues are not that strong having Neptune in the 2nd. I wondered if that's how you saw it as well.
Well, truthfully, I don't know about the financial affairs that this person has or doesn't have with their partner, because after we identified that it was actually about the partner to begin with, then we really just went down that specific train of thought about their relationship to their relationship. And it didn't so much become a financial thing. It was just about how is this relationship framing me? Like, how does this person who I'm intimately connected to treat me? And how am I showing up in this relationship? And why do I feel the need to show up that way? So that's really the direction we went down when we saw that. Now, this Neptune is extraordinarily important, but for another reason, and it has nothing to do with money. Does anyone know why?
Is it opposing exactly Venus and exactly squaring the nodes as well? Not exactly squaring, but it's squaring the nodes. But basically opposing Venus, and Venus in a fall again in the 8th house, which is again related to other people's money, related to relationship as well. For me, 8th house is also related to relationships. Yeah, so that's emphasized more the relationship question in this chart.
Definitely. Why don't people like to say death? Why don't people like to say
I can say that. That's not a problem with me.
Death.
I'm a Scorpio. I'm gonna say that, but I just it
Okay,
did not
good.
really occur to my mind this time.
Good. Now, William Lilly, and not just Lilly, but many authors in the 17th century as well as pre the 17th century said that in relationship questions, if it is a woman asking the question, then the ruler of the first house would represent the woman. The moon would be co-significator within any question in general, but then the woman would also have Venus being her co-significator, whereas the man would have the ruler of the seventh house as well as the sun being his co-significator. Here we have the sun already being the ruler of the seventh house, so the man only gets the sun as his sole ruler, but we could also look at the states of what's happening to Venus within this chart to get a deeper sense of understanding. And here in this chart, we see Venus in her fall in the 8th house of death, despair, suffering, but also anxiety. Anxiety is a word attached to the 8th house as well, in the tightest opposition to Neptune. I personally consider the 8th house to be the valley of the shadow of death. It's quite biblical in that way. Because after you move from the 8th house, you set below the horizon. You're going into the underworld. And with the opposition to the Neptune, it's my love stuff is confusing to me. The content of my heart brings me a sense of confusion, but also the things that I idealize bring me a sense of confusion. And I'm already not strong enough to fend or protect myself against the environment. I'm already in my fall. I'm already in a pretty low position. And then you're going to throw an opposition to Neptune on top of me with that, as well as a parallel to Neptune. And it's not a parallel, as well as the exact contra-parallel to Neptune. It couldn't be more exact. Here we have the Venus is at north 5 degrees 31 minutes, and Neptune is at south 5 degrees 31 minutes. That is as exact as can possibly ever be. So Neptune is fundamentally serving this antagonistic role within my life that is keeping me stuck in confusion, that is keeping me stuck in a state of disillusionment and probably disappointment, but that's also not making me feel as if I have any sense of clarity regarding what to do next. It's a big deal, which is why, to a large degree, you come in asking a question, how do I regain sureness that everything is working out in my favor? When in fact, you really should be asking the question, is this the right relationship for me?
So now we know why the confusion with the question, because the person is actually so confused that doesn't know what is the question is, and going around and not going to the real point of their life. So it's good that you can help telling them, here what you need to concentrate on, here what you need to, process and make decisions.
Yep.
What I also saw, RASHA, too, in line with the whole Pisces, Neptune, Venus, was that Pisces happened to be the D12 sign. So that ties the whole thing right in there, too. And with Neptune being in Pisces, being a player.
Pisces is the D12 sign. You are correct. Which does take us back to that second house. Undoubtedly, we are drawn back to the second house. So maybe there is a monetary consideration, or maybe that's just meant to pull our attention onto that Neptune and how that Neptune is impacting the entire situation. But yes, Tracy, thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting because like I was saying, how I went in really tight with all the horary specificities. After that, I did a whole reading on the whole chart. And even just because it was more of okay, I see that this person it doesn't seem like they're regaining this sureness. So it brought me to my own invitation to look at it from a solution-based orientation. So it was from an evolutionary astrology perspective, it's the 9th house being about some type of belief, and then Libra being about a partner or a relationship. It's some belief that this person has about trying to actualize the sun. This relationship is creating this sense of undoing with the 12th house being connected all to it. So I bring in spiritual practices there. So I just thought it was interesting how it all like came fully around to that.
Well, I think that's pretty cool. And maybe I need to learn evolutionary astrology. Because I don't know anything about anything. Whenever people talk about evolutionary astrology, I'm always very fascinated. So yeah, maybe you need to teach a class and I'll take it.
I think that once I'm like really rooted in this horary, I think it would be really helpful for people to see that angle, because when like if it's not a yes or no and there are people giving you questions like this, it does really like you said, it brings in more space for the counseling aspect of it, where it's like I can see what to tell this person that would be super helpful, and I would just give it as an invitation and it will be helpful. I just know it because I can see it. So yeah, I think that's good to have, especially on the back end when we're speaking of horary specifically.
Good stuff. Now I'm going to take a crack at being an evolutionary astrologer for 30 seconds. And I'm going to say that Neptune, now that you brought up that 9th house cusp, Neptune is actually in what we could consider to be a partile quincunx to the 9th house cusp. So what is confusing about my belief systems, and also even without bringing in the quincunx to the 9th house cusp, Neptune is in opposition and contraparallel the ruler of that 9th house in any event. So what is the confusion surrounding my beliefs about love? And how is that confusion causing me to not even realize that I should be asking about love in the first place, as opposed to asking this larger existential question about the sureness that everything is working out in my favor? I always tell people that if you find yourself asking an existential question like this, and you're in a relationship, and in your relationship, this sort of question comes up for you, then chances are you're in the wrong relationship. If you've never had those sort of existential questions before in your life, but those questions have only just now come up in your life since being in this particular relationship, how can I regain sureness that everything is working out in my favor? Who am I? That's another big one. You're in the wrong relationship and you start questioning who you are. It's like, dude, give me a break. Something must be wrong with the scenario that you're in if for the first time in your life you're asking yourself the question, who am I? And you were sure about that up until this point. You have to look at that relationship. And there's no other field of inquiry within life that's so hidden for a lot of people. Because if you're in the wrong relationship and you want it to last, it will never occur to you to ask, am I in the right relationship? If you're in the wrong relationship and you want it to last, you will ask every other question imaginable. Questions that question the fabric of your life itself. How can I regain success if everything is working out in my favor? Who am I? What is my purpose? What is my dharma in this lifetime? Who have I come here to be? How can I best serve humanity and everyone within it? You find yourself asking these larger than life questions when you find it difficult to ask the very simple question, is this person compatible with me? Am I compatible with this person? Is this the right relationship for me to be in right now? Because if that were the question that were asked, the answer, based on this chart, would most assuredly be, this is a rough one. And it's looking like a no.
Can I just add one thing? If we go to the modern planets, you know, the ruler of the ascendant is Aquarius. Sorry, it's Uranus, and Uranus is exactly opposing Mercury, and that Mercury is exactly trining the 2nd house, Pisces. So it's like from the beginning you can tell, okay, you know, even if we go with the modern planets, it's Mercury opposing Uranus. It's already somebody who is could be kind of depressed. They are looking for answers. They're trying also finding an answer through this work of astrology or divinity or tarot to find some insight. So it's just fascinating how we can weave in anything, we learned from astrology, even if it was a traditional astrology or modern, we still can go, we still can understand the question and the querent.
Well, I gotta let you know that that one was a bit of a leap for me. And okay, I'll just keep hanging out around you, and maybe one day I'll learn some more about these non-traditional rulers. But that one definitely stretched my imagination a bit. But thank you for submitting that.
But you would say that any ruler of the ascendant that's retrograde is like a delay or something's going on that's an issue. Yeah.
Well, but Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are oftentimes retrograde for 6 months out of the year in any event. So I mean, there's a so fact of life is that the astrologers who I respect the most in this field are modern astrologers. As I look within my own life and as I look within my own practice, the astrologers who have truly shaken me to my core because they've offered me something that wasn't a part of my arsenal of astrological skills before have been modern astrologers who use Uranus as the ruler of, what do they use it for? Uranus as the ruler of Aquarius, and then Pluto as the ruler of Scorpio, and then what's the next one? And then Neptune as the ruler of Pisces. And honestly, I listen to them, and what they say makes sense within the context of that chart and within the context of that reading. And it's a stretch on my brain cells that's oftentimes uncomfortable, but I do realize that they make a lot of sense and they have a really solid practice. For me, I don't care about the sort of knowledge a person has. I care about the tangible evidence of their skills and their ability as an astrologer. And the astrologers who have done it for me in the deepest sense of the term have been modern astrologers using modern rulers. Some of those people are Christine Skinner, Faith McInerney, Gary Kristen. I know that Judith has a presence within the world as a traditional astrologer, Judith Hill, because she uses traditional rulers. But a lot of the astrology that Judith practices is astrology based in Alan Leo and Saphariel and Raphael, which are rather modern people. So, I mean, and these are astrologers who consistently deliver the goods. They never fail, in my opinion. So I'm saying all that to say that I've learned a lot from modern astrologers, to be certain. And I'm always curious to hear a modern perspective, because oftentimes it does add another layer of meaning to what was already said within the traditional chart.
And if you use it as, if you do use it as a co-rulership, then it's always like what you can see and what's happening versus like what's actually going on in somebody's background unconscious mind. That this person like potentially could be playing out some trauma with their sibling or something. It's just, it could go there, right? Like, but we like just throwing it out
there. I'm a simple sort of person. I'm a steak and potato sort of person. So if I can get to the steak and potatoes, I want to get to the steak and potatoes. And I don't oppose that other piece. But for me, within my practice, I can get to the steak and potatoes using what I use. But that doesn't mean that I'm saying that you all have to do what I do. So I'm definitely curious to see what things you all create as we continue to practice together.
Yeah, I appreciate the way you go about it, though. It's really helped my practice a lot. So I'm always both and when it comes to astrology at this point.
I do just want to add that I appreciate that we do all come from pretty different backgrounds, because every time we tackle a chart, I'm always learning something new about somebody else's perspective, and I love that.
I think it's a really healthy thing. And I mean, even amongst ourselves, as I look at all of us, like we obviously all come from different walks of life as well. And I think that this is really special that we can come here, sit down and do this sort of work together, because I think we represent largely the diversity of astrology, not just diversity based on what our social background might be, but also diversity in terms of where we come from astrologically. What are some of the things that have nurtured us astrologically? What are some of the things that we hold near and dear? And I really wish this upon the larger astrological field. I wish more spaces like this, because this is what the world looks like. And if we can make our astrology look like what the world looks like, I think that we could really do something extraordinary with this astrology for the next generation and also for ourselves right now. So thank you for participating in this space with me.
For me, there's just nothing better than just being open and supportive, which is this group completely, no matter what background we come from. And if only the querent would be a little more open and get out of their fixed self, they might find themselves in a better position as well.
Amen. Amen.
I'm going to echo everyone. I really appreciate everybody's opinion here, because, you know, I studied the evolutionary and now I'm learning more about tradition. So it's so nice to hear Janay and Mychal, like, you know, different aspect. I really like it.
All right, everyone. So thank you once again for joining us here on the Oraculos Horary Astrology Hotline. It is truly a pleasure being able to be here and facilitate this with these amazing astrologers who represent the wonderful kaleidoscope that is our amazing field of astrology. And I'm really excited to continue to share in this space with this team of people around me. So if you're interested in having your own horary questions answered, please feel free to go and visit my website at www.oraculosastrology.com. You can go to the book of readings page and get it in there so that you can have your question here as well. And also, please do go and make sure that you check out the work of these amazing astrologers by clicking on the links to all of their social media platforms down below, so that you could see the amazing authors and healers and counselors and teachers that are amongst us, because we're definitely a talented bunch over here on the Oraculos Horary Astrology Hotline. So until next time, be well, be safe. We love you. And talk to you soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye.